What is up, everyone? Welcome to this week's NerdBall Fantasy Football Show. I am your humble host and astronaut aboard the Pitts 8 Moon Expedition, Pete Rogers, and I am joined today by some of the nerds. We have resident old man and millinery extraordinaire Clark Barnes, and the queen bee of the Austin Eckler Hive, the Ginger Woodsman Nick Bodiford. Guys, how we doing today?
Doing great, Pete.
Very good, Pete. How are you?
I am well. Clark, I feel like after giving you all of this props at the top of the show, saying that you're a millinery expert and extraordinaire, we haven't seen your collection of hats, and the people want to know where all of a sudden these hats disappeared to. There was you flaunted them so early in the YouTube. Now that we're on YouTube, the YouTube show, and now they're nowhere to be seen.
Well, you saved me having to look up what that word means, so I appreciate that. And
that's some research. Did a little behind the scenes, a little searching to see what do you call someone who makes hats? And it's a millinery.
It's too hot for hats, Pete.
That's true. You guys are like in the midst of this like epic Northwest heat wave.
It's just hot.
It's just hot.
It's hot.
It's hot here, but I feel bad because we haven't gotten Bert groomed in a while, and he's not getting groomed for like another 2 weeks. We go outside for like walks, and he's just like after like 5 minutes in the heat, he's just like slowly slugs behind us, and you're like, oh, poor guy, you're overheating.
So just to put things in perspective here, Clark is a Texan, so when he's saying that it's hot, it means it is hot as hell. Being a Seattleite, if it's like 68 degrees, I'll keep my language clean, but it is that. I mean, that's t-shirt and shorts weather for us. This is literally 100 degrees outside right now. Not used to this.
Yeah. Well,
it's still not as hot as these hot Dynasty takes that we're about to bring to your ear holes today.
Clark Barnes, always one to get us on track, keep us there. I'm always like, oh, maybe we should just be a weather podcast and just talk about the different weather throughout the country. But, maybe that doesn't have quite the pump, the punch that a Dynasty or just a general football show does. Yes, like Clark said, we're going to talk some buy low Dynasty options for your league. So if you're in a Dynasty league, this is the kind of time I personally like to kind of look over my roster and kind of figure out maybe where some moves that could be made. But before we get to that, let's talk some NFL news because there is some news to cover. And we'll start with Demaryius Thomas retiring, the wide receiver for mostly the Denver Broncos, but also a brief stretch with the Houston Texans, brief stretch with the Patriots. He had a brief stretch some other places too, I believe. But primarily did all of his damage with the Denver Broncos, has retired. One of the things that like I didn't appreciate until I looked back on Demaryius Thomas's career is like he was there during that. I mean, obviously he was a part of that like Peyton Manning where that Denver Broncos offense was just unstoppable. Him and Eric Decker. Demaryius Thomas, like 2012 was the wide receiver 5, 2013 the wide receiver 2, 2014 the wide receiver 2, and 2015 was the wide receiver 15. That is a hell of a stretch to put together, Nick, as a fantasy wide receiver and someone who maybe the tail end of his career kind of seemingly fizzled, but he at his prime, Demaryius Thomas was an absolute beast.
Well, and wasn't that all done after he tore his Achilles?
I think so. I mean, he had an injury early in his career and then came back and with Peyton was just lighting the world on fire.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain that it was like either rookie or second year. I'm double checking right now, but
stats and infos on it.
Yeah, to come back from this, 2011. That is crazy. So you said he was wide receiver 12 or wide receiver 5 in 2012.
Yeah.
So he tore his Achilles at the beginning of his sophomore season. Like that, that is bonkers that he went on to do what he did.
Yeah, he had 1,400 yards, 10 touchdowns in 2012, 1,400 yards plus, and 14 touchdowns in 2013, and in 2014, 1,600 yards and 11 touchdowns. The dude was locked in and a easily top receiver during that time period. And now he's Now he's retired. It's one of those things too, where it's like we've reached that point where when players are retiring at an age where you're like, oh my God, I remember when you got drafted in 2010. It's like, I mean, it's 11 years ago, which is crazy. But it's also like, oh yeah, 2010. I was a sophomore in college then. And so it's like, wow. And the whole career has spanned throughout that. So Demaryius Thomas, good for you. Relished in your greatness. Let's move on in the news. Mike LaFleur, offensive coordinator for the New York Jets, not Matt LaFleur, his brother, who's the head coach of the Green Bay Packers. Clark knows that fact. He says Denzel Mims needs to play better inside, which here's the exact quote from him. What is it? He plays big on the outside. He's got length in the radius. We're going to get him playing better inside. The numbers during training camp. This is interesting, Clark, for me to hear from my standpoint, simply just because it seems like Elijah Moore, the rookie who they drafted, has been kind of like killing it in rookie camps and presumably is going to play inside. And it seems like Denzel Mims is a natural fit alongside on the outside with Corey Davis. It's interesting that there's emphasis being put on him playing on the inside. Do you think that as well?
Almost every training camp story that I hear, I'm going to, take it for what it's worth. Coach says he wants a player to do better at a certain part of the game. If he starts hearing that over and over and over, and beat reporters start saying, man, Denzel Mims is in the slot like 50% of the time, they're doing a bunch of motion stuff. Well, then, after about the 12th, 13th, 14th story, then I'm very interested. But right now, a coach is just saying a second-year player needs to get better at something. Mims is 6'3" and super fast.
Yeah.
Hopefully, he will not be shoehorned into a role where they just drafted maybe the second or third best wide receiver in this class who performs that role incredibly well.
Mims is extremely tantalizing, and I think that he's a good add if he's for whatever reason available in your dynasty league. He wasn't drafted by this team though, right? Like this isn't. I mean, I guess he was drafted by Joe Douglas, but when the coaching staff took over, they engaged in a fairly sizable overhaul. They brought in Corey Davis, drafted Elijah Moore. They even re-signed Jamison Crowder. We've all been kind of focusing
to a pretty big pay cut, if I'm not mistaken. So that they did restructure his deal. But they also gave him a pretty big pay cut, which might mean that Jamison Crowder's time on that roster is not as long as maybe we anticipated.
It's longer than we were anticipating a month ago when we all thought that he was going to get
That's
cut.
true. When he was going to get cut. That's true.
Yeah. So as far as Mims goes, I don't really know. I mean, we know. So here's the thing. We know what Corey Davis is going to do. He's largely going to play X. We know what Jamison Crowder is going to do. He's largely going to play in the slot. Elijah Moore is this very, very speedy guy who typically plays in the slot. But I mean, there's one role left open. It's field stretcher. And if they're talking about Mims going inside, that seems strange to me. And he's only taken second team reps. I'm not looking forward to drafting Mims right now. I'm interested in the other guys. And I don't think that Crowder will necessarily play like a full complement of snaps, but I think for me, it's Elijah Moore and Corey Davis, and then a big gap after that.
Yeah, that's how I feel when looking at this Jets crew of pass catchers. Is Corey Davis? I did a mock last week on NerdBall where I was drafting 101 and did snake and went through all of it. And I got Corey Davis in the 9th round. This is just using Fantasy Pros mock draft simulator, so it's just going based on where players are ranked. I'm not drafting against actual human beings, though. We're trying to set that up some point. So if you want to partake in maybe a mock at some point, dear listeners, let us know. But getting Corey Davis in the 9th round, that's a potential wide receiver 1 in that offense, and someone who I think could give you wide receiver 2 days pretty regularly. So I really like the value of Corey Davis. And then you're right. I would agree with you, Nick, where it's Elijah Moore is the other wide receiver in this offense who I would be invested in later in the rounds because of the fact that just everything coming out of camp has been just nothing but praise about this guy. And like you hear beat writers just basically being like, Elijah Moore was by far and away the best wide receiver in camp. And there's been a lot of hype coming about him. And it seems like since he was drafted with Zach Wilson in this, by this coaching staff, he seems to have the inside track. And hearing Denzel Mims like possibly getting pushed into a role that maybe isn't exactly what he's made for, or one that is also has Jamison Crowder and maybe Elijah Moore in there. Something feels a little off there, and it certainly diminishes any kind of excitement that I would have for Denzel Mims in his sophomore year.
They could be, the last thing, we don't need to talk about the Jets too much, but I mean, last thing is they maybe they're trying to hedge and have him line up as a pseudo tight end if Herndon, flops again.
Maybe.
I don't want to quash speculation because this is
Clark's favorite thing in the world.
It gets us thinking about how these players should be used. We talk about these things in very concrete terms when we really have very little idea with a lot of these situations how it's going to turn out. But I will just mention that Julio Jones ran a lot of his routes from inside as well. So it's just wide receivers, while there are these traditional roles and some of them play a particular role and that's all that they do, I think it's a good trend that we're seeing more and more of is you just move your wide receivers all around and they should be able to play everything, right? So definitely something to keep an eye on. But I mean, we're talking Dynasty today. I'm taking so many shots on these second-year wide receivers like Ruggs and Mims and all these guys who are just being left for dead. Because if you hit on one or two of them, they're free, and you've got an absolute stud wide receiver. And Mims is built like that. Corey Davis has been in the league for 5 years, had half of a good season, so we'll see. Not willing to write Mims off yet. Longer term thinking.
Yeah. I actually back in like May. Back in the spring, traded for Henry Ruggs in my Dynasty League because I agree. You got to get him at good value. And the guy, I have a hard time believing Henry Ruggs isn't going to do something of fantasy note and value this year. Nick is perplexed or confused or not certain, but I am certain. All right, let's move on to the news. Finally, we have James Robinson talking about the Jaguars backfield. Now, this is one. Clark just dropped a piece on NerdBall today, his Jacksonville Jaguars preview, giving you a little bit of insight, his thoughts into how this offense might play out. But beat reporter Tony Smith on the Jaguars beat says that James Robinson will be, quote, heavily involved and, quote, see most, if not all, of the goal line work in 2021. It sounds like the general structure that is his projection and what seemingly the Jacksonville Jaguars are operating with is James Robinson is going to be the 1 and 2 down back and goal line back with Travis Etienne coming in on third downs. To me, this is comforting to hear, even if it's just coach speak, even if it is just conjecture that, who knows whether or not it ultimately plays out exactly as they're talking about it. As someone, I have James Robinson in a couple of dynasty leagues I am in, and I was pretty happy with getting him last year. And then, of course, Travis Etienne in the first round diminished some of that. But I am encouraged by hearing the fact that he is that there still is going to be a large role for him. Now, I know Clark doesn't believe anything that comes out of the Jaguars' mouths and is certain that it won't be Travis Etienne. It'll actually be Carlos Hyde is the running back that you need to be getting in Jacksonville.
It's not that I don't believe him. It's that it sounds like they, meaning like Urban Meyer, doesn't know what he's doing. And at least isn't really nailing the opening month of being the head of the Jaguars organization. James Robinson should be the lead back for them this year. And that's not an indictment on Travis Etienne. Like, it's really hard to play football in the NFL. Having a role as a rookie where you get 45% of the touches instead of everyone all of a sudden expecting you to get 80%. That's just ridiculous. James Robinson, absolute gift that the Jaguars, just looking the gift horse in the mouth, decided to go spend a first round pick on a very electric running back because they didn't get the wide receiver that they wanted. This is just, if you want to hear more scathing remarks about the Jaguars, read my preview for their team. It's just an absolute mess. But if I was in charge of the Jaguars, I would be playing both of these guys a lot, and Robinson would be like the traditional, Yeah, he's the RB1, and Etienne is going to be a very heavily used backup in his rookie year, with obvious plans of looking to in year 2. Etienne's probably going to get the lion's share.
Do you think that we could see something, Nick, like the Browns backfields here, where you have Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and both of those guys have such a distinct role, and it's only their role that they both still offer good and reliable fantasy value?
The term that I've heard, and I default to him because of the phenomenal offseason that he had, but the term that I've heard Josh Norris toss around is the role of the slasher, and that's basically what we had hoped Laviska Shenault was going to be, where he's this dude who gets like over 100 targets and 60 to 80 carries maybe. Now, as an aside, Laviska's having a phenomenal training camp. So
also blowing up camp. Good Lord.
Yeah, he's right now looking like the guy I might want to be drafting as their wide receiver 1 instead of Chark. But I've been poo-pooing Chark for a bit now. But yeah, I think Etienne, I think that we can bill him for like 150 plus touches. I think I'd be surprised if he saw over 200. Urban Meyer made clear that Etienne was drafted instead of Kadarius Toney because Kadarius Toney was gone. And what he wanted was just like what he had with Curtis Samuel in college. He wants this hyper athlete who can do both things. What will be interesting to see is if this position doesn't tilt the field in the way that Meyer thinks it will, right? The last time, I guess a prominent comparison would be like Denard Robinson, to continue invoking the Jaguars, who like just flamed out of the league. If he's not just like altering games with this one bizarre player, then what happens with the roles? And that's something that I don't know. I don't think we can necessarily even give like too educated of guesses. He seems like an arrogant individual, Urban Meyer. So I could see him just kicking Robinson to the curb in favor of Etienne because he was his first round pick. I have no idea. This is, I'm just speculating here, but I that's the question that I'm most interested in asking right now is what are they going to do if it doesn't work out?
This is going to be such a disaster. Right, like Urban Meyer.
That's what's going to happen.
Urban Meyer is used to having the best athletes on the field. You pay those recruiters to get out there and get those guys, and pay their family and buy new tractors, and get them to come play for you. But that's not how that works in the NFL. Like if you have the athletic ability to be one of those field tilters, turns out, not everyone in the NFL is smart, but like pretty collective good knowledge. Tyreek Hill's not a gadget player. They taught him how to play wide receiver because it turns out having the guy on the outside that you can't touch is better than running some BS trickanery like Statue of Liberty play with freaking Tyreek Hill. Like those things just don't work. We hear about this all the time for like 3rd, 4th, 5th round players coming to the NFL. It's like, oh, you just have to get them in space. Well, no shit, guys. Like if you get them in space, they're picking up yards. That's not easy to do. Who was the last successful person to do this? Maybe Percy Harvin, but usually it's just someone who's really good at a position. And then the coach just used them a little bit creatively. This is just, I feel so bad for Jaguars fans and Daryl Bevell is your offensive coordinator. A guy who either A, hasn't been able to run the offense he wanted to for like 15 years because he had Adrian Peterson forever, and then he was the offensive coordinator for the Seahawks. You see what happens when you try to pass the ball, Pete Carroll. And now he's moving to be the offensive coordinator for a guy who made a career off of Tim Tebow. I just don't know. This is gonna be not good, Jaguars fans.
Clark's negativity is so beautifully undercut by the tweeting birds and chickens outside that like it just brings this delightful like Snow White joy that comes anytime Clark makes this like Jags are gonna burn and this franchise is awful. Then you just change it back. Tweet. I love it. It's great.
So the two things I want to comment on there, I remember even in like 4th grade, the Statue of Liberty was either like you house a touchdown or somebody's housing a fumble. And
oh yeah,
I hope that Meyer runs one per game and it just gets blown up every time.
Hey man, the Patriots used to run that a fair amount. They would used to run that with mild not regularity, but they ran it at least multiple times.
Remarkable. As for Bevel, I think Bevel is like the apex of what a donkey can be. He likes to run the ball a lot, but he's also very good at throwing deep with play action. And he's like he and Pat Shurmur are on the same spectrum.
He's like a useful donkey, right? Like no one wants a donkey, but if the donkey's going to be like carrying your pack up a hill, you're not going to say no to it. But like, do you really want a donkey? No one's going to be like, oh my God, I can't believe I have a donkey. That's so amazing. What a great possession. Are we still feeling good about James Robinson as our RB26, Travis Etienne as our RB29? Sorry, where our staff rankings are at. Feels about right to me.
Yeah, they're flexes.
Yeah.
Beckham wants to know who we're calling an ass. Darren Bevel. No one on the Packers.
Daryl, but getting his name
well,
wrong
Darren
too.
Good. We're on you, Darren. Darren Bevel, you better watch your ass. That's an ass you better watch. All right, well, there you go. That's all we got for the news. All right, let's talk some Dynasty. Let's have some Dynasty chatter. We're in the off season. If you're just doing redraft leagues, you probably haven't drafted yet. And so then it's like, well, who cares about all of our rankings and all of that effort that we're putting into at nerdballff.com, which you should go check out. And also you can be a Patreon supporter and support us. We have a lot of cool perks for our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/nerdballff. We, of course, appreciate everything you're willing to contribute. We have a lot of cool things. You can join our Discord channel and talk some NFL with us during the games. We'll have a starts and sits question tab. You can ask us your most pressing start and sit questions during the season. All of that could be yours for just a low monthly contribution to help this site and show operate. So make sure if you enjoy what you're listening to, enjoying our content, go to patreon.com/nerdballff and support us. All right, Dynasty, let's talk. All right, well, that was fun. The podcast we were recording just got cut in half, unbeknownst to us. Nature was against Nick's against our Dynasty, I guess, buy lows because my power suddenly went off. And so we stopped recording, but we're back. Hopefully the power stays on enough to finish the show. So we'll try to make it speedy so that Mother Nature doesn't interrupt us again. Nick, start us off. Dynasty buy lows. Who is a player that you are looking to trade for in Dynasty leagues who you think people are undervaluing or underappreciating?
Right. Okay. So this one, it's not, this isn't technically a deep cut, but Deebo Samuel, wide receiver 35 in MFL 10 Dynasty, going as the overall 72nd player. What is that for? Yeah, for the month of May, looks like. The case for Deebo is that he's in the perfect system. He's built like a running back, 5'11", 215, exceptional after the catch. It's rare that we see somebody who has repeated after the catch performances, but in his first 2 seasons in the NFL, he was second and first in yards after the catch per reception with 8.5 in 2019 and an insane 12.3 in 2020. The next closest for reference is 8.1. He had the Jones fracture that he suffered in June of 2019, and he ended up having a setback, so he missed the first 3 games of the year. He got COVID partway through. Ultimately, his 2020 was more or less derailed, but he still put up some splash performances. The issues with the Jones fracture are that sometimes the screw that's inserted is the wrong size, and it can be complicated with a bone graft. I don't think that he had to have a bone graft, but sometimes when players come back too early, it can result in a fracture. The way you know that this fracture ended up being bad, like the re-injury, which he seemingly had, is if they have to have surgery in the following offseason. He has not had to have surgery. It looks like this was just a crack. It has healed. He's good to go. Kittle is there. Ayuk is there. I've got Ayuk is a wide receiver 12, but I think that with Trey Lance coming in here, and I've made clear that I think Lance is going to take over much sooner than later. I think that Deebo will absolutely hit his wide receiver 35 ADP right now, and I expect him to be a top 24 option this year and moving forward. Yeah,
I'm a big Deebo fan. First of all, because of this stat and this stat alone. He had 391 receiving yards last year. His ADOT was 2.3. I just think that's absolutely incredible. But you're totally right, Nick. Like, he is in the perfect system. Kyle Shanahan we saw it his rookie year when Kyle Shanahan is going to get the most out of Deebo Samuel. And even when Deebo Samuel was coming back and dealing with injuries last year, those times with the games where he did start, he put up 4 of them were plus 60 yards. So the guy, he can produce in this offense and produce at an extremely high level. I think that this offense is going to be able to support 3 good pass catchers in terms of fantasy potential. Obviously Kittle is a, top 3, top 4 tight end in fantasy. And I think Ayuk and Deebo are, as a duo, certainly a top fantasy duo. I don't have Ayuk as high as you do, Nick. That's just poppycock. You're being absurd. Don't be ridiculous. But I love buying low on Deebo Samuel. I think that it's really easy for people in dynasty leagues who have had them and dealt with his whole sophomore year of injuries to be like, oh my God, healthy George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk is there. Trey Sermon is going to be this backfield's going to be healthy. Deebo Samuel's just not going to get the touches or the looks that he needs in order to be a reliable fantasy contributor. And if you swoop in there and you're like, hey dude, I'll take Deebo, even sweeten the pot a little bit, be like, I'll send you a 2nd round pick. Everyone's going to make that trade 100%. And I have no problem sending a 2nd for Deebo because I think that Deebo from this point onwards, if he stays healthy, is going to be, easily pay back that pick. No problem. Excellent. All right. Well, actually we'll segue into one of my guys then, one of my buy lows, because it's a similar vein. And it's a narrative that I like finding and preying upon. And it's the one where it's just people who have a player who had a really good season in an offense, the next year that offense suddenly gets a lot of weapons, and people, especially young weapons, people find it are pretty easy or do a pretty good job of convincing themselves away from that player. So the guy who I like is T. Higgins. Obviously the Jamar Chase hype is making people forget just how good Higgins was last year and are making them panic well, maybe there's not enough in this Bengals offense for Higgins and for Chase and for Tyler Boyd. And I guess Joe Mixon's about to get the biggest workload of his life. But for all of these guys to eat, Higgins last year, 900 yards, 6 touchdowns. The thing that I like the most is that Higgins isn't a wide receiver 1. He proved that what he is he's a great complement to a guy like Chase. And now Higgins goes from seeing top corners to seeing secondary corners or number 3 corners if you're going to push a slot guy to cover Tyler Boyd in the slot. There are 163 targets available in Cincinnati with A.J. Brown and Gio gone. So it's easy to see a world where each Chase, Higgins, and Boyd get 105, 110 even plus targets. I would give a back end first round for Higgins right now. I think this offense is going to be explosive for the foreseeable future. I think Chase and Higgins is going to be a wide receiver duo that's going to dominate in coming seasons. We've seen plenty of offenses in the past that have put up to top 15 options with regularity. We saw the Falcons have done it. The Steelers have done it at a point in time with Juju and Antonio Brown. Obviously the Vikings did it last year. Maybe that's in the cards for 2021. I don't think so exactly, but I do think that come 2022, 2023, this duo of Higgins and Jamar Chase is going to be one of the better duos in the NFL. And if I can get T. Higgins now and then reap the rewards of presumably a regular wide receiver 2 in the coming years, I'm going to take that deal in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I really like Higgins. He's 22 and he is in the mold of a wide receiver 1, 6'4". And what I'm looking at here says just barely sub 440. And 40 is not the be all end all, but that means you've hit a good mark. If you're 4'4", 4'5", you're pretty good. Higgins had a really, really good rookie season. We get spoiled by the Justin Jeffersons of the world. That's not how most people, even the best wide receivers in the league, that's usually not how they come into the league. Higgins performed absolutely phenomenally. The addition of weapons in an offense that has potential with a quarterback who I think we saw enough from last year that Joe Burrow is at least good, probably Baker Mayfield plus at least, and then has a lot of room to grow. Supporting 2 wide receivers with no tight end, that's not a difficult proposition for an explosive offense. If Higgins is at any kind of a discount, I would jump all over it. I'm looking at the DLF ADP that we're using just kind of as a measure here. Higgins is the wide receiver 15 and middle of the third round. He's going before Mike Evans and Amari Cooper. That's a little tough to swallow, but it's not really far off. If he slips, or Pete, like you said, someone's talking themselves out of it because of Jamar Chase, I think this is an excellent put a feeler out there and see what you can get for it. Because the idea that T. Higgins is now being replaced is silly. Gentlemen, lots of wide receivers play in an NFL team. So
yeah. And it's something too where it's like with these buy lows, there's a spectrum of that. Obviously, some of these guys are super, like you can buy them on the cheap, and that's great. But some of these is also too where it's like the person who has T. Higgins on their roster might not think that they might rather have the 8th pick of the first round or the 10th pick of the first round, a back end first round pick over T. Higgins. And for me, it's like, I would much rather have T. Higgins because I think that has that potential locked in and I know what I'm going to get in him. And so it's one of these things where I think it's much easier to entice a manager to trade some of these guys because of the fact that maybe the narrative isn't quite as saucy as it was even a couple months ago.
So, Clark, I'm not sure which like pro day metrics you were looking at there. What I've got from NFLCombineResults.com was one of the main reasons why I did not like T. Higgins. So as you said, he's built like a prototypical X receiver at like 6'3.5", 216 pounds. But the 40 that I'm seeing is 4.59, which I don't typically care that much about 40s unless they're like really good or really bad. That we're closing in on 4.6 there, which is like really pretty, it's not great. 10-yard split of 1.66, which just is bad. Vertical of 31, broad jump 10 inches, like just barely hit that threshold. And then his short shuttle is 4.53 seconds. Higgins, from what I have seen, is a subpar NFL athlete. He was very productive last year, and he showed that he is able to run routes at an NFL level. Now, I do have questions as to whether or not, like, as he gets a little bit older and starts to lose more of a step, if this guy can actually, like, I mean, some CBs are going to be able to run like literal circles around him. So for me, he's a total coin toss. I think that he's very much a situational draft choice for me. Like if he falls to a certain area, then I dig it because he's already shown that I think he's going to be a guy who sticks around on NFL teams for a long time. And maybe if all you're looking for is an NFL role player for your dynasty squad, then I think that that's fine. But with Chase coming there, for me, it's going to be very difficult to trust T. Higgins as anything more than like sometimes weekly, but most of the time matchup-based flex play.
And this is you make good points. And where I got the T. Higgins number was Google search. First thing that popped up on the NFL. I'm not seeing a number for his 40, so that's probably downhill with a backwind pro day number, the 6'4" there. Nick, you made a lot of good points, but just also doing some additional research while you're chatting, I feel that we can seal the deal on this one. T. Higgins destined for the Hall of Fame. He's from Clemson and some dreads. So yeah, basically DeAndre Hopkins too.
Yeah, I mean that pairing locks you into wide receiver stardom. Ignore Sammy Watkins. Forget about him. But
hey, he flashed.
The Lizard King.
Oh, he had. That's true. And he's the best wide receiver in Ravens OTA. So maybe Sammy Watkins revenge tour coming back.
We need to talk about that. I wrote up a Ravens preview too, where I address more of that. More to come on future pods.
Nerdball.com. Oh, nerdballff.com. Don't do nerdball.com. Wrong site to go look at. Nerdballff.com. Clark, who's a buy low for you?
So buy low for me is one of my favorite types of buy lows. It's Michael Thomas. So I kind of go through the questions of why is this person the rank that they are, and it just doesn't make any sense to me. His ADP is number 32. He's the wide receiver 14. So it's middle of the third round for a guy who in 2019 was the wide receiver 1. He had never been worse than the wide receiver 7 or the wide receiver 9, which I think he was in his rookie season. He's just an absolute baller. Last year, high ankle sprain, week 1. High ankle sprain is a kind of injury that just can completely derail a season. I believe that he tried to come back too fast and had a bunch of cascading injuries from that. When he came back after being suspended for punching a teammate in practice, he pulled his hamstring and just was not the same guy all season. I think people are looking at that plus his age of 28 and saying, Michael Thomas is washed up and over the hill. For comparison's sake here, DeAndre Hopkins is 29, Calvin Ridley is 26, Tyreek Hill is 27, and Devontae Adams is 28. So if you think 28 is too old, I get it, but I do not. There is an adage in Dynasty football that just drives me crazy. It goes something along the lines of, I'd rather be a year early than a year late. That sounds really clever, but it assumes that you know when that year is going to be and that magically you're the only one that knows. So you're going to bamboozle your league mates into taking this old aging guy off your hands. You draft players like this to get them in their prime so that you can win championships, or at least I do. Some people seems like they play fantasy so that they can have the prettiest, like, in 3 years roster. And I love playing against those people because they're the kind of people who will trade you T. Higgins for a second-round pick, or the kind of people who will trade you Michael Thomas for a first-round pick. Michael Thomas is an absolute baller. Now, the one concern I do admit, is going to be playing with a new quarterback, and that's a big question mark. I would answer that he's either going to be playing with Jameis Winston, whose only trouble is that he throws the ball to the wrong team exceptionally well. And, maybe Taysom Hill's not the best quarterback in the league, but he was heavily targeted. He had something like 86 yards per game and something like 8.5, 9 targets per game when playing with Taysom Hill. So while those aren't like unbelievable, outstanding numbers, Taysom Hill clearly understood that Michael Thomas was very, very good and we should get him the ball. Middle of the third round for someone on a Hall of Fame track for the next couple of years is just doesn't make any sense to me.
The two Saints stars, Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara, given that Drew Brees retired and we don't know who the quarterback is going to be, though we do know it's Jameis Winston. Nice try, Clark. Those are two guys I have actually, in my dynasty, one of my dynasty leagues, I actually traded for Alvin Kamara, and I feel like I bought a little low on him, but it was a fair trade. But they're perfect targets for if you are a roster that you feel like you have a chance at contending this year in dynasty or in the coming years, like you are primed and you just need that one piece to push you over. Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, the Saints, like Michael Thomas especially, is a perfect guy to go get because you're right, Clark. Like the narrative surrounding him is pushing him as low as he will ever be in fantasy, unless he comes off of like an ACL injury. But like even still, he's coming off an injury play season. There's a change at quarterback. Like there's so many narratives there where people are going to be like, is he going to be the same? Plus there's the fun, like Michael Thomas only runs slants narrative too, which, is true, but he's really damn good at it. So,
someone who's talking right now has been calling him Slant Boy from time to time, Pete.
Slanty Boy. It's a perfect guy. Perfect guy to buy low on in Dynasty. I love it. I think he's an easy top 5 receiver, like the easiest top 5 receiver to pry away from someone right now.
I sign off on all of this. It's great.
Oh, well said, Nick.
I got him at 410 in a 2 QB league. Okay,
you got him at 410?
2 QB, but still
sure.
410. Yeah,
that's impressive. That is impressive. A guy who's going late in redraft leagues, who I really like, but also this is a guy who I think there isn't really a lot being talked about this player, and is someone who I think you can get for probably pretty cheap, and that's Damian Harris for the New England Patriots. I gotta obviously chat a little bit about the Patriots because I do love that team. There is such an old, tired narrative about how you should be terrified of the Patriots backfield when it comes to fantasy. Now, up until a certain point, that has been true. Obviously, Bill Belichick doesn't give a fuck about your fantasy team, and he takes great joy and pleasure in just rotating through running backs and never quite knowing who's going to get the touches. That being said, last year, Damian Harris was the clear RB1 last year on this roster. He had 137 carries in the backfield. Sony Michel was the number 2 back with 79. So Damian Harris is the number 1. They didn't bring back Rex Burkhead. So this backfield is even fewer contributors. They did draft a guy in the 4th round, but that's Damian Harris averaged 5 yards per touch last year. He was PFF's RB2 in terms of offensive rushing grade and their RB3 in offensive passing grade among running backs. He was terrific with the touches he had last year. White is getting older, and I think is going to kind of his steel grip on the passing game, I think is going to relinquish a little bit, and we'll see Damian Harris more involved in that pass game, something he can do. He did a little bit last year. Weeks 4 through 14 last year, which is when he was healthy, RB22 in standard leagues, despite only scoring 2 touchdowns, and the RB27 in half-point PPR, despite seeing very, very small passing work. He's the unchallenged running back there. I think he has RB2 upside in New England, and you can get him really, really cheap. So this is a guy who I'm 100% targeting in Dynasty leagues because this is a run-first offense. We saw it. They added 2 tight ends. They have one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. Go get the running back who's going to be carrying the ball 150 times.
Yeah, Harris is just really cheap, and he's very good. And you kind of get 2 shots with Harris. So Cam does suck a lot away from the running back, at least with, scoring opportunities. Hopefully they won't try to run a high school offense because their quarterback's a little mobile this year again. But even if Cam only starts, half the games or so, you get a second shot next year when Mac is the starter, because Mac's not going to be rushing for 500 yards and 5 scores probably. And Harris is young enough for that to matter. So with his cost and with your kind of 2 scratch off tickets for Harris, I think this is a nice ad.
I like that 2 scratch off call. That's a great call, Clark. Excellent. Nicholas, give us your second buy low candidate.
My second buy low candidate is the downfield role in Cleveland with the Cleveland Browns. So
just in general, just buy that trade, ask whoever has it. Say I'll send you a 1st round pick for down roll in Cleveland.
Yeah,
downfield roll.
Yeah. The answer is to always send your 1st round pick for him. So
trade your 1st and get whomever you want.
Right.
Great deal.
Looking at the Browns salary cap situation, Jarvis Landry is going to be a free agent after 2022. Odell Beckham Jr. is on the team 1 more year after that, as is Donovan Peoples-Jones. The way that I see this is you want to try to get Odell if you can, and you want to try to get Donovan Peoples-Jones if you can. One of these players, I think, is going to work out. 2019 saw Odell hampered by a hip injury that he later came back and said basically it was the fault of the training staff. He got a second opinion, and they told him, yeah, you should have had surgery on this. It was a sports hernia. Obviously, training staff didn't like that, but whatever. He had surgery on it in between the 2019 and 2020 seasons. Then 7 weeks into the 2020 season, he unfortunately tore his ACL. Before that, he was playing pretty well, and that was despite the fact that the Browns really took a long time to get a handle on then new head coach Kevin Stefanski's offensive system. By the end of the season, they were friggin' rolling on opponents. I think they're going to hit the ground running this year, and it's a group that I really want a piece of. We talked about on the Strength of Schedule show that the Cleveland Browns for this season have an excellent schedule. In the future, that's going to be something where role and efficiency kind of just determines the value of the player. But as far as Odell's ACL injury goes, when the season starts, he's going to be around, I think, in month 11 of his ACL reconstruction. Between that, and that's a typical time to return, 11 to 12 months. But between months 9 and 12, the re-injury rate is the same. So he's going to be well into his as good as it's going to get until you go past month 18 on the recovery train. So yeah, I mean, he's going to be good to go. As of now, his rehab is going very well, but okay, he's 29 years old. Let's say that this doesn't go well and he has a setback or whatever. What you have on your roster, hopefully as a backup there, is Donovan Peoples-Jones, who is a big bodied receiver. He's got over a 40-inch vertical. He's a very capable downfield prospect. And they drafted a guy, I think his name was Anthony Schwartz, and I think he was an accomplished sprinter. He's a 3rd round pick this year, but Donovan Peoples-Jones, he's been on the team for a little while now. He knows the system obviously better than this rookie does. Given the division that they play in, given the schedule that they have this year, I think that this role on the Browns team is going to be a fruitful one. And I want whichever guy is going to likely have access to the majority of snaps with that job.
Yeah, the zone run play action scheme has a lot of room in it for just like a pretty serviceable wide receiver to put up 12, 13, 1,400 yards. I mean, we're seeing George Kittle play this role basically from the tight end spot in San Francisco because he's the only one with two good legs for a little while, and now he's having trouble with that too. Jarvis Landry can't really play that role, even though I love Jarvis Landry and he's very good. He's more the Kevin Walter to the Andre Johnson for you super old Texans fans. Odell, I shopped him in a couple of Dynasty leagues and could not get a first for him for drafts. Any first. I would have taken any first for Odell and couldn't have gotten it. And now I'm kind of glad that I didn't. He has more potential to bounce back than I think taking a shot on, 111 or 112. So it could be a good time to buy low on him. I also really like the idea of just taking the position. We know that there's going to be prepared. Just grab both of these guys, especially when a couple of them are free.
Yeah, I think the Odell, you go target him. The thing that I liked about seeing him last year with the Browns, because year one with the Browns, 16 games, he went over 1,000 yards, great. Saw 133 targets, great. But he only caught 4 touchdowns, and that's not wildly encouraging. That doesn't get you the big fantasy numbers. And then last year, despite only playing 6 games, 43 targets, 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. And so like that touchdown production was on pace for a much bigger outing, closer to what we saw with the Giants. And so if that also clicks into fruition, then we're going to see an Odell, maybe not of Giants old, where he's dropping 1,300 yards and 12 touchdowns. But one maybe where he's going 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns, which is still plenty. Like that's much more than I would say anyone who has Odell right now is really expecting from him. And the Donovan Peoples-Jones is free. Like I know, Nick, you're saying, well, I want one of the. Just take both. Like I think you can easily get Donovan Peoples-Jones. No one's really thinking about him as a guy to hold on to. And the last 4 games that he played in for the Browns last year, 232 yards and a touchdown on 14 targets. Like he had 9 catches for 232 yards. So like that downfield role he was thriving in. And so if he sees even any kind of work like that in 2021, that's huge. That is a big time guy to be able to get for utterly and absolutely free. I'm muted. I like that a lot. Clark, wrap us up.
So this is going to be one that you're going to hear a lot of folks talk about a lot in redraft and in Dynasty, and that's Clyde Edwards-Hilaire. He is currently the RB 15 in 1 QB Dynasty startup drafts with an ADP of 26. And so now I know that this isn't someone that you can get at the 9th or 10th round of your draft, but that he's going at the tail end of the second, very end of the third means that everyone in this draft has the opportunity to take Clyde Edwards-Hilaire in the second round, and they're all passing on it. The only story I can tell myself of why this is because if you were like me and you drank the Kool-Aid on Clyde Edwards-Hilaire and you picked him like 8th in a startup and you felt really good about it, that was too early. Those expectations were incredibly lofty and that was kind of stupid. Now, looking at that and then discrediting Clyde Edwards-Hilaire, the football player, in the situation that we're going into 2021 is also stupid. Clyde Edwards-Hilaire is going to be the number 1 running back on this team in his second season. They let Damian Harris go to not Damian Harris. Got it written down. Damian Williams, Super Bowl snub MVP. Damian Williams, they released him. They've upgraded the offensive line. That was more for Patrick Mahomes than it was for the running game, but still good for everyone there. Clyde Edwards-Hilaire finishes the RB22. Where he finished doesn't really matter, but his per game average in 13 games was right in between Austin Eckler and Raheem Mostert. So as a rookie, you're putting up 10.5 standard scoring points a game. That's very good. And now he's going into year 2, going after guys like J.K. Dobbins, who is also going into year 2 and is also electric, but is like behind another running back that the team just paid $10 million for 2 years for. So Edwards-Helaire not going in the 9th round, but should not be going in the 3rd. And a lot of people who drafted him, especially in your dynasty leagues, were the ones who were burned. So, float some offers before the hype gets up there, before people realize, like, hey, the running back on the most explosive offense in the NFL, who's really good at catching passes and very quick, is going in the 3rd round.
Or, hey, the fact that all of the reasons that you were excited about Clyde Edwards-Helaire last year are still true today. Nothing changed. Like, there's no other running back that entered, no change in this offense. Every single reason you were excited about Clyde, why he was taken as a top 5 fantasy back last year, all of those are true today, again this year, and now you're getting him at a discount ADP. I wrote about Clyde Edwards-Helaire over on the site, talking about players who could break out this year due to their touchdown positive regression, the touchdown dependency. And one of the things that I found really surprising was that there was such a narrative about Clyde Edwards-Helaire last year being like, oh, he's a smaller back, a diminutive back. The Chiefs just aren't giving him red zone carries. Like, he's just not going to score touchdowns. He has to score touchdowns from outside the red zone. He recorded 44.4% of the Chiefs' red zone rush attempts last year, by far leading the team. That's top 15 in the league last year in terms of team percentage for red zone touches. So, like, it wasn't that they weren't giving him the ball. He wasn't being hyper efficient with them. He had 3 touchdowns in just 28 attempts. But B, the Chiefs also were top 5 lowest in run percentage inside the red zone. So they just weren't running the ball when they were there. Now, that could do, because you have Patrick Mahomes, that I think is going to regress even a little bit to the medium. And if it does, more opportunities for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who's clearly that guy. They didn't bring anyone else in to take that role from him. And if you add 2-3 more touchdowns to his season, suddenly now he's top RB2, fringe RB1 contention. And it's just, ultimately, if you were excited about him last year, you should be doubly as excited about him this year, because now you're getting him at a discount ADP.
I like all this again. Yeah. The dude looked great when he was healthy. He suffered some pretty brutal injuries. Like you said, their run rate in the red zone was very low. And Damian Williams is gone. Now, Damian Williams wasn't there last year, but it's promising that
they brought in Le'Veon Bell too, which is like a similar kind of like, oh, we need another back there, and they didn't.
Right. Yeah. So that's very promising. I think that CEH can be treated as, I've got him, I think, as like the running back 13. I'm sure he'll have weeks where he finishes inside the top 12.
Yeah. If in redrafts, I'm drafting Clyde Edwards-Helaire as my RB2, I'm happiest boy in the world, because I would probably happily have him as my RB1, but I ain't going to do that because you guys are stupid and you're not drafting him as an RB1. So I'm going to take full advantage of all you nincompoops out there who are doing that. And now we've broadcasted that. So now everyone's going to do it because everyone listens to this show. So it's a catch-22, really, our business. It's like, we want to give you good advice, but we also don't want to kind of destroy the good vibe.
The stream of consciousness, Pete.
Thanks, Clark.
Yep.
Thanks. You can tell it's the end of the show. We lost power halfway through. Oh my God. It's just hot. We're all just sitting in our sweat right now. So let's just end it. That's all we got for you this week. Please rate and subscribe to the podcast on your podcast platform of choice, and make sure you follow us on Twitter at NerdBallFF. Like I said, if you enjoy the show, do think about supporting us over on Patreon, patreon.com/NerdBallFF. There are plenty of perks for our subscribers, and we, of course, would appreciate whatever you're willing to contribute. You can follow myself on Twitter at Pete M. Rogers. Follow Clark at NFL Clark, and Nick at Ginger__Nick without a K. And of course, make sure you check out all the amazing content we're putting out over on this site, nerdballff.com. Until next week, my fellow nerds.